Welcome to our 6th ever Art Slides lecture. This lecture covers Hellenic pottery, painting, and sculpture. It is one of 2 lectures on Hellenic art, so make sure you catch the other one before taking your quiz. The word Hellenic basically just means Greek. You will sometimes see Greece referred to as Hellas, which is where this term comes from, but be sure to differentiate it from the term Hellenistic, which is a type of art that we will study later this semester. Okay, so as the title would suggest, and as I have already said, this lecture covers painting, pottery, and sculpture. It is important to note that the sculpture in this lecture is separate from the architectural sculpture of the other Hellenic art lecture. It is sculpture in the round, meaning that it is fully relieved from a piece of stone and is meant to be viewed from all sides, and it serves no architectural purpose. Okay, jumping right in. Our first piece is a black figure painting on an amphora vase. These always remind me of the Muses in Hercules. They're often depicted in this style. A few things to note about black figure painting and Hellenic vases. This particular type of vase is called an amphora and would have been used to store honey, olive oil, water, or wine. The style of painting is called black figure for obvious reasons. It's a technique used in the archaic style from about 600 to 480 BCE. This particular piece was made by an artist named Exechias and is called Achilles and Ajax playing a board game. This piece is an exercise in characterization. Achilles and Ajax were rival Homeric heroes who likely never would have played a board game together. But Exechias portrays them in this manner to display their competitive natures. Notice how they are postured so as to indicate intense concentration. Achilles, the player on the left, still wears his helmet, portraying his dominance in the game. Notice also the lingering influence of Egyptian and Mesopotamian art. The characters are in profile, but their eyes face us directly. Their postures, however, stray from this style as they are rendered more three-dimensionally. Next, we see a similar style, but in a different technique. This is known as red figure painting, again for fairly obvious reasons. This technique is still in the Archaic period, but relegated to the late Archaic, from around 530 to 400 BCE. This style of painting allowed for freer, more natural forms, and for a skin tone that was closer to that of the Greeks. Early use of red figure technique maintained the highly stylized figures, but the figures became more natural as time goes on. This particular painting appears on a terracotta crater vase, which is a large bowl that would have been used for mixing wine with water. This piece is titled The Abduction of Europa. In this scene, Zeus takes the form of a bull and abducts the mortal woman Europa. It is meant to be somewhat ironic, something that the Greeks would have recognized, knowing the classic story, as Europa becomes fascinated with the bull's horn and willingly rushes off to her fate. Notice that some of the heavy stylizations of the black figure painting are left out in favor of a more organic form that indicates motion. Okay, moving on to the sculpture of the Archaic period, we have the York Kouros, so named because it is owned now by the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. The Greek word kouros means boy and is typically used to denote any sculpture of a standing male figure. In general, these figures were made of marble and were commemorative in nature. Kouros reflect early Greek exploration of the human body. These are life-size statues that are approaching anatomical correctness. These early statues reflect the Egyptian-style frontal pose. The arms and hands are held at the sides with one foot forward. However, it departs from the Egyptian style in several ways. Note the openness between the arms and legs. Also note the use of rounded features, such as the kneecaps and braids, where Egyptian style relied more heavily on squares. This departure creates a softer, more relaxed image than those of ancient Egypt. Next, we have the Peplos Kore, which is held at the Acropolis Museum in Athens. Kore means girl, and, like Kouros, is used to denote statues of women from this period. This particular statue is named after the peplos garment she wears, which is a type of dress that is pinned at the shoulder. A few key differences to note from the New York Kouros. First, she is dressed. The convention of male nudity stems from a Greek interest in the human form, but it is some time before it becomes acceptable to depict women in the nude. Second, notice her face in comparison to the Kouros. Only about 70 years separate the two statues, but we see a remarkable shift in realistic facial portrayal. Notice what we call the archaic smile, which accentuates the fact of being alive. Unlike commemorative statues such as the Kouros or the funerary statues of ancient Egypt, this statue is meant to depict someone who is alive. Moving out of the archaic period, we now see an example of the early classical style. The Kritios Boy, named for its sculptor, reflects some important developments in Greek art. This period is marked by a sense of self-awareness, possibly brought on by the Persian War. Here we see that the archaic smile has disappeared. The face, like the body, is portrayed in a neutral, ideal form. Note that the head is slightly turned, a departure from the earlier works which always face the front. The right knee is also bent, and the torso is slightly shifted, lowering the right hip, implying that the figure's weight rests on the left leg. This pose is called contrapposto, meaning positioned against, and will be commonly used throughout the Greek classical period and the Roman Empire. Another important development in the early classical period is the use of bronze as a medium for sculpture. Bronze casting and the lost wax method have been used for smaller objects since the Aegean period, but we don't see large-scale use of bronze until the early classical. This particular example of bronze casting was found in the sea off the Cape of Artemision and dates to about 30 years after the Kritios Boy. It is believed to depict either Zeus hurling a thunderbolt or Poseidon throwing his trident. Notice the careful attention to pose, so that it is clear the figure is winding up for forward motion. This reflects the Greeks' growing interest in understanding the human form, especially as it relates to athletics. This theme continues and becomes more advanced by the end of the early classical period. It is perfectly displayed in this statue, The Discus Thrower, by the artist Myron. This piece displays incredibly close attention to form and balance. Notice that it is centered around two arcs, one from the crown of the head down along the spine and all the way to the left heel. Another arc is formed from one hand to the other, following along the figure's arms and shoulders. The overriding motion in this piece is a circular one, as the figure twists back, bringing his shoulders in line with his right thigh. This circular motion is reflected and reinforced by the circular discus held above his head. We can easily see that Myron has captured a brief moment in time as the athlete winds up in preparation to throw the discus. Our two remaining slides come from the classical period, also known as High Classical. This style is marked by simplicity and natural forms. The most important artist to know from this period is Polykleitos. One of the most prolific artists of his time, he developed what he called the canon. It is thought that he once wrote down the elements of his canon, but it is now lost. Nevertheless, he claimed that the piece you see here displayed all the elements of said canon. Polykleitos believed that the ideal form followed certain proportions, that the sizes of various body parts should be measured in relation to other body parts, such as hand to forearm and forearm to arm. This philosophy is deeply rooted in the Greek understanding that the universe was governed by a certain orderliness that could be observed and understood. This particular statue by Polykleitos, the spear bearer, displays these characteristics. Also notice the use of the contrapposto stance again. This lends a gradual S shape to the figure, giving a strong sense of the figure's underlying organic structure. Lastly, an example of late classical style, we have the Aphrodite of Knidos. The original sculpture was done by the artist Praxiteles, but has since been lost. We only know what the statue looked like from Roman copies such as this one. Notice the contrapposto stance and the gentle S curve of the body. Praxiteles perfected this curve to the point that it is sometimes called the Praxitelian curve. The statue was initially commissioned for the island of Kos, but it was rejected because of the nudity. The statue was then accepted by the city of Knidos, thus its name. And here Praxiteles depicts Aphrodite emerging from a bath. Praxiteles was known to celebrate the female figure, and it is with this statue that female nudity was accepted into the Greek canon. Alright, that's it for today. Be sure that you have watched both lectures and take your quiz.